I'm John Marler with AEG, Senior Director of Energy and Environment.
I'm Marika Anthony Shaw from Plus One.
So nice to meet everyone. Thank you for joining our panel here. We're happy to have you here. Happy to have you here at South by Southwest Eco. This is my first time, so it's been a real fun experience seeing the conference. Really happy to share what we do here at AEG. Few housekeeping items. We're going to try and go through this in about 20 minutes, I think, to leave plenty of time for Q&A. With regard to the Q&A, we're going to use the Slido app, which most of you are probably familiar with by now. And then I think the rule is if we exceed our time limit, we're the last session of the day. I'm not really sure why this really applies, but I was told let's take it out in the hall for additional Q&A and things like that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Are we ready?
I think we're ready.
Okay. So my take on this and what we had talked about in setting this up was to really kind of give you guys an overview of what's going on in the sports and live music worlds on sustainability. Basically, we view sustainability as two sides of the same coin. Number one, operationally, we want to reduce our environmental footprint. And number two, we want to leverage the visibility of our brands to basically engage the global community, our stakeholders, on these important issues. So I'm going to kind of give AEG's spin on it, more from the venue and sports side, and then Marika is going to take it from the artist side. So here we go. So if you're not familiar with AEG, we are a global sports and live entertainment company. We have 4 operating divisions. AEG Live is our music side. So that's live music venues, music festivals like Coachella, Stagecoach, the Barclaycard British Summertime event at Hyde Park, the Desert Trip event, which is going on right now in Indio as we speak, with the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, Neil Young, Bob Dylan,
Who?
Roger Waters.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, some up-and-comers. We have AEG Facilities, which is our venue management and consulting group. So we manage venues like the Barclaycard or the Barclays Center in New York City, home of the Brooklyn Nets. We've got AEG Sports, which worldwide we own, I think it's 10 sports franchises now, including the Los Angeles Kings of the National Hockey League and LA Galaxy of the Major League Soccer. And then finally, our real estate group, which develops sports entertainment properties, really got our start with LA Live in Los Angeles and downtown, and also properties like the O2 in London and the new Mercedes-Platz Entertainment District in Berlin at the Mercedes-Benz Arena complex. So I head up our corporate environmental sustainability program, which we call AEG One Earth. We like to think it's an industry-leading program. We've been doing this since 2007. What you see up here is our 5 sustainability reports. Basically, we collect all of our operating data like most environmental sustainability programs do, and then we report that out. We do this because we think that the real key is the data. We want to track our performance. We want to make sure we're reducing our impact year after year. There's other components. We do a lot of education and communication, activations around sustainability events. We're a member of the Green Sports Alliance. We're a founding partner in that organization, which is basically a coalition of the major league teams, leagues, venues, colleges, and universities, basically trying to spread awareness about sustainability through sports and reduce the impact of sporting events on the environment. So today, I'm really happy to announce to you guys, it's basically going live as we speak. We just put out our 2016 Environmental Sustainability Report. And within that, I'm also happy to announce that our company is adopting a science-based goal for greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, in the last 2 years, we've done a very intensive effort to revise our goals and make sure that our company is doing our part to reduce our global our greenhouse gas emissions at a rate that's going to avoid the worst of global climate change. So we've adopted what's called the 3% solution, which is put out by the World Wildlife Fund and the Carbon Disclosure Project, which means that we're going to reduce emissions 25% or better from 2020 to 2010, and that's equates to about a 3.2% reduction a year. We've also rolled out new goals on our potable water consumption. We're going to reduce that 20% by 2020 at water-stressed sites that are identified by the World Resources Institute. And then finally, get our global portfolio diverting waste from landfill at a rate of 70% or better by 2020. Right now, we're at about 55%. So I wanted to really quickly just blast through what we call our material issue areas and leave plenty of time for Q&A because there's all kinds of fun stories that we can get into. Basically, the key one is greenhouse gas emissions. That usually comes through our consumption of electric power and other fuels like natural gas, diesel, and gasoline. We attack that by energy efficient practices, energy efficient technologies like LED sports lights, and then renewable energy, either through on-site applications like fuel cells or solar, but also through market transactions like RECs and renewable energy purchases. We also are very focused on our water consumption, although since 2007 we've realized that water conservation means different things in different locales. So we're really focused on reducing our potable water consumption where it's most critical, like in California and China. So we've subjected these 10 sites to additional scrutiny, but for our other 90 or so sites, conservation is still important, but we're just not really tracking it at that goal level. When it comes to waste and recycling, from my perspective, operationally, that's the hardest thing about live music and sports is managing all of the post-consumer waste. I think we do a decent job of it, although the infrastructure to support those activities varies from place to place. Globally, our worldwide portfolio, we're about, like I said, about a 55% diversion from landfill rate. We're trying to get that up to 70% or better by 2020. Two other kind of ancillary issues with our business. The first is green building. As being a company that develops new properties, renovates old properties, and manages existing properties, obviously we want the buildings to be green as possible, not only for stewardship reasons, but because green buildings are cheaper to run and operate. So we're a big believer in following certifications. We have right now, I think, 6 or 7 LEED projects in our portfolio around the country. Other parts of the world, we use standards like BREEAM or EarthCheck. But essentially, whenever we're building a new project or renovating an old project, we're looking to those third-party certifications to know what are the best practices. And then finally, fan and customer transport. This is something that we don't track explicitly in terms of the way we control our program. It would be a scope 3, an indirect consequence of our operations. But we do try to engage with our fans to let them know, if you can take public transit, if you can carpool, use a ride-sharing app to get to the game, that's going to reduce your environmental footprint. We install electric vehicle charging stations where there's a demand for it. We do things like Park and Glide in London with our Thames Clippers operation and the O2 complex, and basically just try to spread awareness about the environmental impacts of traveling to and from the events. So I know that was an extremely quick overview, but like I said, I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, and with that, I'll turn it over to Marika.
Thank you. Can you pass over the clicker too, please? I have to say that from the artist perspective, it's really rare to feel inspired by a promotion company. And I do have to say that in conversations with John, in learning what AEG is doing on so many different levels in our industry behind the scenes that we don't even know about, it is pretty awesome and inspiring. And it's a rare feeling on this side of the curtain or whatever it is. So awesome.
Thank you.
I am here, and I am so thrilled to be here to talk about Plus One and some of the artists that we work with. My background is as a musician. I played in the band Arcade Fire for about 9 years. And one thing that Arcade Fire, I lost it, but you know what? It's not a really big deal. It's just pictures of musicians. It's not really a big deal. So I grew up with, this is going to be short, but I grew up on First Nation reserves. That's what we call them in Canada. My mom does language revitalization. So she goes to communities where there's 5 or fewer speakers left and works with elders to learn the language and revitalizes it with language lessons in community. So there was a deep sense of belief of diversity and a really core sense of identity and the power of identity growing up in my household. And that was a value system that I was really instilled with. And I was also a musician. And so I moved to Montreal and I met this really great group of people, and that group of people became the band Arcade Fire. And Arcade Fire, our lead singer is Haitian. And her name's Regine Chassang, and she grew up in Montreal, but really strongly identifies with Haiti. And for those of you that don't know, Haiti is the poorest country in our hemisphere, and it's 1 hour and 20 minutes away from Miami. It's also recently been hit by Hurricane Matthew, and which completely destroyed one of the main areas that wasn't destroyed by the earthquake. So now that part has been destroyed. I digress. When the band started getting to the point where we were playing shows, and I remember we went to this show in Montreal and there was a lineup around the corner. And we were like, wow, people want to hear this music? Crazy. And at that point, we were like, I don't know if we're, it was a 600 seat room. And very shortly thereafter, we stopped needing our day jobs. The most important thing that Regine, our lead singer, did was she came to us and she said, guys, we got to do something about Haiti. We had learned about the work of Paul Farmer and Partners in Health, and I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that work. It's important, and we blame him. I personally blame him and my mom for getting me involved in all this mess anyways, to begin with. But, and we started adding, we're like, what can we do to participate in this? We are not experts. We are not doctors. We are not historians. We are not of these people. We are cultural people. We know the lens that we can affect this with is through culture and through our shows. That's what we do best. So we decided to add $1 onto each one of our tickets. And the only difference is we just never stopped. So from 2006 onward, we added $1 onto each one of our tickets. We were playing to 1,000 people a night, 2,000 people a night, 5,000 people a night, 10,000 people a night. We sold out Madison Square Garden in 2011, and looking out, we got to say to our fan base, because you're here, because we're celebrating something that is exactly what makes us human, music, and celebrating this together, $25,000 tonight has gone to Partners in Health in Haiti. Moreover, our fan base has now been primarily responsible for building one of the largest teaching hospitals in the Caribbean in the middle of Haiti, which is crazy to be able to do that without a benefit concert, without a separate fundraiser, by just doing what we did best. I looked at that and I was like, oh yeah, see, there we are. There's some musicians. There's us winning the Grammy in 2011. You might remember waking up the next morning, or you might not, and everybody on the news was like, who the hell is Arcade Fire? That was a moment. And so what was becoming more and more meaningful to me was that moment on stage, and the moment that we started getting back from our fans saying, hey, I just changed my major in college from coming to an Arcade Fire show. Hey, I just started a club at my high school from going to an Arcade Fire show. You know what? I'm a 7-year-old kid, and you guys do what you do best for what you care about in your community, and I've started doing a bake sale in the front of my building in New York City every Saturday. And I'm so proud. That $72 check that she sent into Partners in Health is framed up in their office. So it's a really interesting thing, and I was like, why isn't everybody doing this? Like, why isn't this just sort of normal? It doesn't take a lot of work. It's completely effective, and through the cultural lens, we started getting this discussion and this change happening in community. Unfortunately, as we know all very well in this country, we're not looking to our political leaders for guidance. We're not looking to, a lot of people, unfortunately, don't have the same kind of church communities or synagogue communities as we did. And so the people that we're looking for guidance and for direction often is our cultural leaders. And so how can we as cultural leaders, advantage that we are afforded from literally being on a stage, literally holding a microphone, what are you going to do with that privilege? And so that's when really Plus One was born, was how can we as a community come together and affect change through the simple act of adding $1 per ticket and telling people about it. And the telling people about it's really, really key. So I'm excited to say, so Plus One has been officially, formalized and scaled over the last 2.5 years. We went from 1 band to 31. So there's 31 bands traveling around the world. We'll have raised $4 million by the end of this year. And $4 million to me is also 4 million people that got to hear about it. And the ripple effect that's happening in that community is what is profoundly exciting. And the power that we have in this industry is important. And so, we're getting going. But I think understanding the journey from what's happening kind of behind the scenes to the really palpable behavior shift that is not always going to happen. You've got the people at your show that are your fans that are with you and you're kind of preaching to the choir. You've got the people that don't care at all and just want to go to a rock show and they can get that too. And there's that third group of people that might not have had the opportunity to learn about it or to listen or to understand or have someone that they respect talk to them about sustainability or gender-based violence or sexual assault on college campuses or real injustice. One of the conversations that I think that Plus One has with bands at the beginning is how can we identify an injustice that you really care about? And knowing the difference between an injustice and a bummer. And helping channel what that really means and what we can do about it in our own communities, in our own backyards, as well as more globally. And so that's something that we take that responsibility very, very seriously. We seek partnerships. I don't even know, I haven't even clicked ahead. But we seek partnerships with data-driven organizations, community groups that are really, really concretely moving the needle. And it's exciting because Arcade Fire is moving the needle in a little way, but it's much more exciting when you think about Arcade Fire moving the needle next to Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, next to churches, next to the national. So that's our little stat list. So $4 million raised. We're working with global health access, with education, support for refugees, violence prevention, equity, environmental sustainability. And essentially, we're looking at injustice in a very broad way. And how can we adopt our own movement for that? Movement's a bit of a word these days, I know. But, true. But how can we adopt, change of behavior or bringing in that kind of mentality into our own lives? How can we tangibly show the power of collective impact? If we have people leaving a show and the next day they're like, oh yeah, my vote actually might matter, that means something. So right now we're growing pretty rapidly. We're looking at probably having conversations that we're probably going to have 100+ artists join to the Plus One network by this time next year. We're working with partners in the Silicon Valley, working on tech tools and how people can engage Plus One in their own households and their own communities, and we're expanding into verticals like sports, comedy. Anytime a group of people come together to celebrate something, to me, that's a real important opportunity to Plus One. And then that's my thing.
All righty, thanks everybody. So we have 2 questions. The first is, are there any social initiatives, for example, providing access to events for low-income families, employee engagement activities, et cetera? And
is that directed for John?
That sounds like a John question.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, part of our program, obviously, it really begins with the employees. So we do a lot of training, messaging, employee recognition. I just got finished handing out what we call our Greenie Awards at our company summit last week, basically recognizing outstanding work in sustainability around the globe. In terms of corporate CSR programs, we actually split up the community activities with our community affairs group, but we do a lot in that regard. All of our teams, our buildings have foundations which do a lot of community work, which include things like tickets for low-income families, community service projects, and things like that. Anything to add?
Majority of there's like should I skip? And because this kind of goes into one of the answers, or maybe it doesn't. But we often work with, the organizations that the bands have partnered with to provide access either to their staff or volunteers who've, want to come to the show or need a night out, a lot. So I don't know if that's part of that question. But.
Yeah, looks like the next one would be post-consumer waste. If it's the most difficult challenge, what are you specifically doing to tackle it? Really the first thing is not having it show up in the first place. So look at your serviceware, look at the materials you're bringing into the event or the venue. The next step is really designing the flow in terms of how are the materials getting to the customers and then what are they doing with it. So, ideas like segregating certain types of materials, like recyclable materials in certain areas, and that way your receptacles only need to be recycle receptacles. And then the rest of it is basically just figuring out how you can optimize the sorting, whether you do that manually on site or use a materials recovery facility off site. Those are different options. So it's a work in progress. It works better in some countries and some locations than others. But we could be here all night if we wanted to really dig into waste and recycling. Next question is, how do we measure our impacts on a per event basis? That is another challenge. We actually moved our goals to absolute goals, the ones we just announced today, from an intensity-based metric to an absolute metric, because we did a lot of very deep analysis on our numbers and found that there really wasn't a strong correlation when you look at building by building, business type by business type, for things like number of ticket sales, number of events, event days, things like that. So we're really focused more on just getting the total annual consumption of resources, emission of greenhouse gases down. That said, on an individual building, it's possible to do things with that, but we found the math doesn't work very well, unfortunately. So, Marika, I think this one's for you. Can you give a few examples of causes the bands choose to allocate the proceeds to and the reason behind why they choose it?
Yes, for sure. We have, one of the bands out right now, they were actually in town last weekend for ACL, Local Natives. And they are 5 white guys from LA. And we're really concerned over the Brock Turner case. And the egregious act, but also kind of the glaring inequity in the criminal justice process and how that happened. And also what their role as men are, as white men are in sexual violence, and what the platform is that they could do that. So that's where that conversation started. And it kind of took 2 roads. One was a lot of their fans go to college. And as you guys probably know, 20% of women in their college lifetime experience time will be sexually assaulted. The reporting rates are extremely low, and from the reporting rates, actually finding assailants is like almost none. A lot of the stats came out during that media. So there's a group called Callisto, and Callisto.org is using data to build an algorithm to say, like, what are the barriers to reporting? And so from kind of like A to Z have been able to fill that. So a lot this is an algorithm where it's fully anonymous on a college campus, where you can go and create reporting and it'll keep it safe in this database. They accompany the whole process all the way through with clothing, with psychosocial support, with all these other things. And then if you are a survivor, you haven't had to kind of come forward. Now, if I have reported, I might get a notification 2 weeks later that a very similar incident happened in a very similar spot with a very similarly described person. With that, I'm like, okay, cool, I'm not alone. Maybe there's something going on here. Then a third person might come forward, a fourth person, because the data does show that repeat things are happening, but it's not, it's not a lot of people that are perpetuating these crimes. So what can happen at that point is that you don't have to identify to the police, but your college already has that data now. So they can go and say like, oh, in this frat house or in this quad or whatever on campus, there's a lot of crime happening. There's the same thing happening over and over. So you can actually address things to stop it without having to deal with the burden of kind of being the victim in that case. So we partnered them with Callisto, and it's been a really, really exciting thing, but that's a national campaign. They currently work only on 12 college campuses, and they want to expand. But what we were also doing was seeking out local crisis centers, gender-based violence advocacy programs in each market that they were touring. And so we ended up partnering with different communities for each tour. So $1 was going to Callisto and to the local crisis center. And that's why they chose that. They wanted to be able to provide a crisis line to their fan community if they were in trouble. They wanted to let them know that they stand with them. And so all the messaging around that tour has been that. We've got signs up in every bathroom stall of every venue on tour with the crisis line. That's kind of like one example. Another band, and then they actually have been more quiet about it, but had a very personal experience with suicide. And so their entire tour has been about suicide prevention and seeking mental health support. So again, we've been looking at kind of like national to local campaigns. Sufjan Stevens was really troubled by the racial inequity in the criminal justice system in this country. And so we partnered with Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, who are at so many different levels, important levels, from local community groups knowing rights and knowing what's going to happen, all the way to Supreme Court changing laws on children getting sentenced to life in prison. He's really been doing most of the work on the racial injustice stuff in the prison system here, and getting people that haven't had equal access to the proper legal proceedings, proper access. I could go on. We have 31 of them. Does that make sense? But we work really closely with the band and with an incredible advisory council so we have experts from all of these different fields that we can kind of go to. And the first conversation is usually that. It's like, we've got people coming to us saying, this news story really affected me. I can't sleep. What can I do about it? And we start from there.
Terrific. So I've got 5:32, so I think we can do one more question. So let's see. I was going to kind of just merge a bunch of questions into one, because I saw it on there at one point.
I think that's a great
But
idea.
basically it was, what can venues, teams, artists do to do more +1 initiatives? And Marie and I were talking earlier today, and we got, I think, pretty excited that this was kind of the first time we had been introduced, basically the venue side and the artist side. And I think we realized pulling that together is not hopefully that much of a challenge. It's more about just making the connections. I actually think on the sports side of thing, the leagues, the teams, the athletes, the foundations do a really good job on sustainability and social justice projects. But I think it's a little bit harder in the music ecosystem. There's so many different parties, and it's really exciting to meet someone from the artist side, because I think from the venue side, the artist is basically our client. We'll do whatever they want to do. I think it's just having those lines of communications open to know that, hey, we'd like to do an activation around a social or environmental issue.
And conversely, one of the challenges of getting sports involved is like with an artist, you know, if you're at a certain level, what you say kind of goes for the tour. You can really control that. Whereas like the players involved, the players who are the cultural champions aren't really making the same kind of decisions as the team owner and those guys. So it's a whole totally new conversation to have. Is like, you know, because championing it is a really big part of what makes Plus One effective for the audience.
Yeah, and I would say that's why we do what we do. It's, you know, trying to lead by example, do our part to reduce our impact, but also, like the artist, recognizing that if you have a sports star, a music star, you know, pushing a cause, it just helps move it that much further. So, any final comments?
No, thank you guys so much for coming
Yeah,
on the end
thank you.
with the sunset kind of coming in the window. It's a very romantic panel.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.